Great. I would now like to call to order the November 2nd, 2022 meeting of the Indiana State Board of Education. Roll call, please.
Mr. Bess.
Present.
Sheila, thank you. Mr. Losa. Mr. Durham.
Present.
Dr. Ernest.
Here.
Mr. Gastineau.
Here.
Ms. Hamill.
Here.
Mr. Mapes.
Here.
Ms. Moat.
Here.
Thank you. Ms. Rensselaer.
Here.
I see you there. Mr. Watts.
Here.
Dr. Johnson.
Here.
Great, we have a quorum. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Chad. Let's please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved. Second.
With a motion and a second, any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Is there a motion to approve the minutes from the October 5th, 2022 meeting?
So moved.
Second.
With a motion and a second, any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Well, good morning to everyone, our November board meeting, State Board of Education. We certainly have some great news to share, but before getting into that, I just want to take a moment to give our condolences to Mike Brown's family. Mike was a legislative director here at the Department of Education for several years, worked with a lot of different stakeholders. Certainly our thoughts and prayers are with Mike's family. We also, since our last meeting, lost a past board member, Tony Walker. He was a fierce advocate for kids and learning from Lake County, Indiana, and I know is very close with several of our current board members. So our deepest condolences and thoughts and prayers to both of these families as we lost a couple of major education advocates in Indiana. To shift over to, it's hard to make that shift, but to shift over to some exciting news. We did, after the last board meeting, announce our Indiana Teacher of the Year. Tara Kokenauer, who is from Wells County, Indiana. It was a very, very cool celebration. The students and teachers thought that they were coming to a bullying symposium, a bullying required training. And the principal there, Mr. Steve Baker, said, hey, can you just like roll in and stop me in the middle of the bullying symposium and announce it? He called like the night before and had that plan. He also suggested that maybe I wear the Tiger uniform. I did not wear the Tiger uniform. But we did try to just make it a really special surprise for Mrs. Kokenauer. Standing ovation, of course, from the students and other faculty members when she received that award, and I'm sure we'll be introducing her to the board in the future. So really proud of Mrs. Kokenauer, and thank you for representing all of us as educators in Indiana. Also want to share and acknowledge that October 10th through 14th was National School Lunch Week, and I think when you think about the individuals who serve breakfast and lunch, and in some of our schools even a warm meal at night, they are truly unsung heroes in many respects, because we don't talk about them a lot, and yet many of our students, if without for them, if without for the food service provided in our schools, would not have would not have food during the day or would not have a healthy meal option. So really, really thankful for our school lunch and nutrition leaders and staff members. That same week was National Principals Week. You know, we have over 2,200 schools in the state of Indiana. We know the value of a great principal leader. So a huge thank you to all of our building leaders throughout the state who are doing great work. Today, we're going to hear about a couple of different things. We're going to hear an update from our Chief Academic Officer, Dr. Flores, about the NAEP data, as well as hear an update about the streamlining of the standards, which of course was required by statute. So we'll provide both of those updates today. On that note, I'd like to open it up if any other board members have comments or reports. Seeing and hearing none, we'll go ahead and ask for public comment. John Gubera.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Is this on or not? Is it working? Members of the board. John Gubera, just want to say a couple comments about our two friends that passed unexpectedly. I met them in this capacity, so I figured it's appropriate for me to talk about in this capacity. Mike Brown, I worked with at the Senate for quite some time, and then worked closely with him for the 4 years he was a legislative liaison for Dr. McCormick. Three things about Mike I could say. Consummate professional. Mike was very professional, treated everyone kindly, and always made time to meet with you, which is great. Last thing I'd say about Mike is he was a doting father. We talked a lot about, after he had his daughter, talked a lot about that. I could talk about my good friend Tony Walker for days. Tony was a man for all seasons, as many of you know. He transcended many things. Perfect example of him being a man for all seasons is that Tony could advocate fiercely, as Madam Secretary mentioned, for Thea Bowman, 21st Century Charter, and at the same time for Gary Public Schools. Tony rejected the binary that often exists in the state around those options. He was for all of them. He was for every kid. He was for every teacher. He advocated fiercely for all of them. Something I remember finally of Tony at these board meetings is we're debating, I don't know, 8th Rev, something, who knows. And Tony's public comments for a couple weeks in a row was about sugar. You may recall that. Tony recognized the epidemic of processed sugar and what it does to students and everyone in this country. That's a man for all seasons, right? Not just about the academics, but also the nutrition. And Tony advocated strongly about that, of addressing sugar and what it does to people. Lastly, I'd say about Tony, I'd give him the greatest compliment I could give anyone. He was curious, right? He was curious. He was curious about things. He wanted to learn about things, and he wanted to talk to people about things. He was always curious about things. That's a man for all seasons. Gary was represented extremely well by Tony. He'll be missed by myself. He'll be missed by, I think, this board. He'll be missed by Indiana and certainly be missed by Gary, people of Gary. So thank you, Madam Secretary, for providing me this opportunity to speak about my good friend. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Those powerful words. We sure appreciate you sharing that. Kendra Johnson.
Good morning to each and every one of you.
Good morning.
I send condolences also to the family of Tony Walker. Attorney Walker, when he was on the board, voted on one decision that I did not agree with. However, I still respected the gentleman. And after that one decision, I noticed that he became a fierce fighter for the children of Northwest Indiana. So when it comes to our children, no matter whether they're in Northwest Indiana, Gary Hammond, whether they're in Indianapolis, LaPorte, wherever they are, we all have to fight for them. And my daughter said something on Facebook the other day that really caught my attention. People were talking about what Kanye West was doing and saying. And she said, you know what? Your priorities are misplaced. All of you worried about that gentleman. How many of you have checked on your children's grades in school? How many of you have been to the school to talk to your child's teacher? How many of you have been to a parent-teacher conference? You're interested in the wrong things. Let's get our priorities together and worry about our children first and celebrities later. And when I saw that, I had to call her immediately and say, what in the world? And she said, no, Mom. When you raised us to believe that education was important. It was vital to our future. It was the big news. Well, celebrities get our interest, but they shouldn't be our priority. Our children should be our priority, no matter where they were. And I have to admit, as a mother, I was very happy to hear that. Another child shocked me also. He gave me a call and he told me, he said, Mom, I was thinking about you and how important you made education for us. Even when I thought that I wasn't smart or intelligent or anything of that sort, you wouldn't let me believe that. So, you know, if I won a lot of money, one thing I would love to do was invest in some educational program to help children who do not believe that they are intelligent or smart or can do it. Once again, that brought great joy to me because it showed as a parent that the legacy that I wanted my children to pass down was being passed down. That education is important, not just for their own, but for all. And with that being said, I wish you all a great day.
Thank you for those comments and thoughts, Kendra. At this time, I would like to shift to discussion. So we will start today with NAEP discussion and then shift to our streamlining of standards. Dr. Flores is going to be on screen today. She is at a meeting. And then I know Lynn Schemmel is here as well, our Director of Assessment. So Dr. Flores, if you want to take it away.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I appreciate the opportunity to join you today. I'm going to go ahead and pull up my slides quickly and just let me know for sure if you can see them.
Dr. Flores, we might need to, can we turn the volume up just a little bit maybe? All right. Okay, I think we're good.
Okay, are you able to hear me okay now?
We are, yes, thank you.
Okay, perfect. So this morning, I want to start by sharing our recent NAEP release. This was noted publicly last week, but wanted to have the opportunity to provide the board an update and also some commentary as we reflect on these results and how they compare to some of our other data points that we've recently shared with the board as well. So as we think about NAEP, it is referred to as the nation's report card. It is typically given every 2 years. This cycle has been a little bit delayed in light of the pandemic, but it allows for us to have a comparable data point both for our state and also as we reflect on performance across the nation as well. So when we reflect on our NAEP results, we want to keep in mind the overall performance. NAEP has been established for several decades now, and so this really allows for us to have a consistent measure to reflect upon over time across all of our student populations. We can look at this data and think through different policy initiatives that may have been undertaken at different points in time. And most recently, it also allows for us to reflect on the academic impact that we've also observed with iLearn and iRead3 results. Again, this allows us to identify any key differences that we may be observing in Indiana compared with other states as well. So I'll start by pointing out our raw data for Indiana, and for NAEP, our students were assessed in grade 4 and grade 8, both in reading and mathematics. We had around 7,000 total Indiana students participating in the most recent sample. For reading, we had 33% of our Indiana fourth graders that achieved at or above proficiency, and 31% of eighth graders that achieved at or above proficiency. In math, we had 40% of our fourth graders achieve at or above, and 30% of our eighth grade population. And I will spend a few minutes in the next few slides to further disaggregate this data and point out some patterns in our observation that we have as well. This next slide is for grade 4 mathematics. And again, one of the benefits of having NAEP data is to be able to reflect on the data points over time. So this slide shows performance over the last 20 years on grade 4 mathematics. You will see that we have a few points where we started to peak in around 2013, but since that point have declined. You'll also notice the transition from 2019 to 2022 in light of our academic impact, where we see that drop most specifically.
Dr. Flores, I think this is a really important one for the board to just really be aware of. So often we talk about, Indiana is typically above national average in reading and math. We are still above national average in math. Reading, that gap is closing. You'll see that. But looking into what Dr. Flores pointed out, from 2011 to 2013, that's when we saw the gap widen in the state. We were, significantly above national average there. And you can see that gap narrowing specifically between 17 and 19. You see a significant narrowing where the nation went up and Indiana went down. And then if we all know the impacts of COVID. So many times people talk about, well, it's all caused by COVID. It's all caused by the pandemic. And that's just not a completely accurate narrative. As a state, we were actually seeing some downward trends prior to, and I just want to make sure that we're aware of that so that we can go forward now. Keep going though, Dr. Flores.
So the next table that I wanted to share is noting some of our specific disaggregated data for student populations, and a couple points that I want to note here. When we shared both iLearn and iRead3 results, we spent a lot of time discussing 4 specific student populations: Black, Hispanic, English learner, and students with disabilities. So I'm going to highlight some of the specific data points on those specific student populations, just again to correlate between the different data sets that we have. For grade 4 math, we saw the greatest impact here for our Hispanic student population and English learners. Hispanic students dropped 11 points on grade 4 math, and English learners was down 12 points. And then the last slide that I'll share on grade 4 math is when we reflect across our performance and other states, this highlights where we have a level of significance in our performance that's different than the national average. So again, we are still continuing to perform above that national average, and that's noted by that navy blue color. We're joined by 16 other states in that designation, and then you can see the others reflected as well.
So you'll see sometimes certain states, we're seeing this in some of the elections right now gearing up, that they'll advertise, well, our ranking is this. So I'll tell you what Indiana's ranking is, but there's a caveat there. In 4th grade math, Indiana is ranked 8th in the nation when you look at states only, not territories. But the caveat is you can't look at that 8th just at the surface because of the statistical significance. We are looking at that Navy area, the Dr. Flores, while we might be 8th, we're about the same as 17 other jurisdictions. So 1 point either way, and it's the same. So I just wanted to clarify that for the board since it's coming up some in some national elections. We usually don't talk about Indiana's ranking publicly, but yeah, go ahead.
How many students were needed in order to get a score? We go across, we got white, but no black, no Hispanic, no Asian. Mm-hmm. Was there a certain number of students that had to take the test in order for that to be registered?
Dr. Flores, do you want to start with that question and then I can chime in?
Yeah, so you'll notice the 2 dashes there. I may need to lean on Lynn a little bit here. Typically, that end count needs to be about 20. So if she's in the room and can confirm that for you.
And so the diamond there, Lynn, giving you a 30 seconds to get your thoughts together. The diamond there is, I'm looking for the key, Pat. The key is right in the middle. The diamond is no significant change. But it's your point about the dash not available. So in Indiana, we are Asian Pacific Islander and American Indian, Alaska Native is a dash. So you're right, we did not have that data available. Is there anything that you'd want to add there, Lynn?
No, that's correct. There is that certain amount, the 20 needed. Just to throw in, Dr. Flores mentioned that we had around 3,500 students participate. It was very well balanced between the 2 grade levels and then the 2 content areas, and we had 99% participation. So about 1,700 to 1,800 students is what's represented in each of these charts for us that you're seeing.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
So I'll go ahead and transition to grade 8 mathematics. So again, we'll see the same charts represented for grade 8. Here, the trend mirrors something similar to what we observed in grade 4. As we progress through the charts and the grade levels, when we were looking at grade 4, you will notice that we had a peak around 2013. when we look through these other charts, we do follow those peaks a little bit as they matriculate into the older grades. So the cohort associated with 2013, as they progressed into about 2017, that's still representative somewhat of the peak we observed in grade 4. But you'll notice as we reflect across the 2 decades that are represented here, we are slightly below performance when we compare that back to 2003, but still above the national average. In terms of disaggregating our data, and again, we'll observe some similarities here that we also identified with iLearn and iRead3. Students with disabilities, their score decreased by 8 points. And then we also notice our Black student population decreased by 13 points. For this statewide comparison to our other national representation, we are still performing significantly higher than the national average, along with 18 other states.
So in 8th grade math, again, while we're statistically similar to 19 other jurisdictions, we do come in at 11th, just for the board's knowledge. Dr. Flores?
Yes.
Next slide.
So for grade 4 reading, again, we've had a lot of focused initiatives in the science of reading, and so this data is very important for us to reflect upon to inform some of our next steps and strategies. With grade 4 reading, again, we're seeing a downward trend. We're just above that national average of 216, Indiana being noted as 217.
I think if this one right here isn't alarming because of the curve, 2011, we were moving in the right direction as a state in 4th grade reading. In 2015, we started that downward momentum towards the national average. And today we sit at the national average. I know not anyone in here, nor any of our educators, nor any of our people ever want to be that average is good enough. We all want to do much better. And so again, you're going to continue to hear our board, our educators really push on reading, making sure all our kids are literate and we're using those science of reading practices. Dr. Flores, next slide.
Yep. So when we reflect upon our disaggregated results here, I will just note that we saw that significant drop from the prior testing event to this one of overall 5 points. That is something that is reflected in our iRead3 data as well. And so again, this is an area where we have significant efforts and strategies pushing in to better support students going forward. And then in terms of our comparison nationally, this is an area where we are within that second category of jurisdictions that are not significantly different from that national average.
And that's where we used to be in the jurisdictions significantly higher. We're now at 17th if you look at it across the board. But again, statistically the same as pretty much the entire nation. So a lot of work we'll continue to lean on in the space of literacy. Thank you, Dr. Flores.
Sure.
Next one.
And then for grade 8 mathematics, again, a similar trend with what we've observed on the other slides as well.
You mean 8th grade reading? I think you said
I'm sorry.
8th grade reading.
Sorry, 8th grade reading. So a similar trend that we've observed here as well. In this slide, we're 2 points above that national average. Again, with that peak occurring in 2017, that is consistent with what we just observed in grade 4 math and iRead 3, where we had an earlier peak around 2013, 2015. Those students have matriculated into 8th grade, and then that decrease continues. For this specific disaggregation, one area to note specifically, we've observed this in iLearn and talked a lot about it in our July release. We have a level of support that's needed for the English learner population in secondary grades. For grade 8 reading, English learners decreased 20 points.
Whereas the nation increased 4. So we're looking at a 24-point spread with our English learners. And you're going to really see us leaning in on increased funding for our English learners in the upcoming session. And our data over and over as a board that we reviewed echoes why we'll be doing that.
And then when we reflect on our state comparison here, again, within reading, we are within the jurisdictions that are not significantly different. So some of our key takeaways, our largest drops occurred in 4th grade math. However, as we reflect on reading, specifically at grade 4, our scores have been declining since 2015. And when we also compare this to our current statewide assessments, iLearn and iRead 3, for our specific student populations, those that I've referenced during the conversation today, their overall performance remains very low in both reading and math. So I'll pause before I transition to the next conversation. Any questions or additional thoughts?
I have a question.
William has a question. Yeah, go ahead, William.
Great information, but I am just curious, do we know when we're looking at the graphs and those peak years, when those peak years happened in reading and in math, do we know what practices or pedagogies were in place during that time? And what has changed? What has caused the decline? Has any research been done about that?
We have not specifically conducted that level of insight quite yet. We are continuing to try to better understand some of the specific standards or areas where there may be gaps in understanding, but we haven't leaned into the specific practices or curriculum that may have been implemented during that time.
Thank you.
I think nearly everyone could probably make some policy assumptions as well. The state did a major literacy push. It was a huge conversation, the state, around the 2011-ish time period, 12, somebody can fact check me. And we saw that major push, we saw that major emphasis, we linked arms, we started to see an increase at that time. But really we're trying to look at right now, William, here's where we are based on a lot of different factors, including the pandemic. And so now we must aggressively move forward. So we've really tried to stay focused on what's ahead, although it's a really good question. And I'm sure many in the room have different thoughts and assumptions. So thank you, Dr. Flores. Any other thoughts, questions?
Dr. Jenner, I just have a wonder about the grades or the moments of instruction that are most critical leading up to the results that we're seeing in 4th grade. So I think part of what I heard in William's question, in addition to like what was working really well when our performance was significantly higher and then a decline began, my wonder is, with regard to that instruction, is it learning that happens in kindergarten? Is it the foundation that's laid grades 1 through 3 that then we see the fruits of in 4th grade when we're administering the assessments? I'm curious to understand that because I think that would lead to an interesting discussion about the pedagogies and approaches, not necessarily at fourth grade, because it seems that story is, of course, written by that time. When is the narrative coming together, and what do we need to better understand about those earlier grades? I understand if now's not the time for that, but I would love to learn more about it if we don't want to do that now, or we don't have the right folks available to discuss it.
I think this board has really verbalized on repeat the criticalness of early literacy, just to focus on one area, to the extent that this board even identified an indicator of which we will build out in the early literacy space. Additionally, I would also add, if you remember a discussion, gosh, it was probably July, August that this board had the discussion, probably August, about the iRead results. And for the first time ever, we had a look in to what is happening in second grade. If you remember, we needed 30 to 35 schools to pilot iRead 3 in second grade. We had almost 400 schools, thanks to the leadership locally. And what we found there, and William, I'll never forget that question that you asked. We got through the data, and William asked about, well, what about the student population gap at second grade? Because we talked about the overall foundational reading skills were developed, about 47% were developed. And William said, well, what about the student population? And the response, I don't know if Lynn, you shared this in the analysis, or Dr. Flores, but those gaps were already there. And as educators, many educators in the who are in schools right now would be like, well, yeah, of course they are. Absolutely. And that's where, Katie, Moat, to your point, that early literacy and really, making sure children have access to early learning, making sure we're laser focused in the K-1-2 primary years is just, we're seeing is so important. Anyone else is welcome to chime in as well to Katie's thoughts.
Well, I think you also, boots on the ground have to understand that we're getting students who can't identify the front of a book in kindergarten, can't identify which way you hold a book, have never seen or been able to utilize a book. And some of them are ESL kids, refugee kids. Most all of them are kids in poverty. And we're starting from nothing to grow kids. So the process is going to be a long way, and in my mind, kind of bleeds into your next topic of standards. And what do we really want kids at kindergarten to know? And not only are we responsible to make certain they can read, but we got to show them how to play. And we got to show them how to act with others, because sometimes it's access to early learning, and we're the first formal setting they've ever been in. But our teachers and administrators are doing a lot of good work. And right now the gap's going to always be there because of all the starting points of the kids that we have across the state. And I think we got to remember some of that as we, put data up and information up. Of everybody's starting at a different spot. And then how can we move them, and how can we track how we move them, and what's important to us as we develop standards. Because if we focus hard on those areas, then we'll get the results. That's what we did in 11 and 12. We started making that an emphasis in all of our schools with the 90-minute block of reading, and may have swung it way too far one direction. And now we need to come back and really hone in on skill development. How do we measure that skill development?
Thank you for your thoughts. Good thoughts. Anyone else? All right, thank you. Let's use that as a transition opportunity then and shift to House Enrolled Act 1251. And we'd just like to provide an implementation update for the board.
Thank you. So HEA 1251 was enacted last session, and it requires the Department of Education to identify key skills and traits that are necessary for students to be successful post-secondarily. With that requirement in legislation, we initiated, as a first step, a research effort to identify those key skills and traits and inform our subsequent steps as we reflect thoughtfully on standards. So with our research effort, there were several aspects that were conducted. First, a literature review of scholarly articles and papers, reflection on other states and the use of their employability skills, scans of post-secondary institutions and national organizations. There was an intentional focus group protocol that was established with several representatives from employment, enlistment, and enrollment. And then we also conducted a survey where others could continue to contribute to that analysis across the state of Indiana. Within this research effort, we really tried to hone in on these specific questions. First is the information related to an Indiana GPS characteristic. Secondly, as we were reflecting on research articles, did at least 50% of those identified reference the skill or trait or something comparable? When we had the conversation with focus groups, we tried to determine if that conversation also highlighted those skills or traits. And when we reflected on the survey results, we were trying to determine if the skill that was identified was determined to be essential or absolutely essential by those that responded at least 70% of the time. And then when we reflected on the state level information in that state scan, we also wanted to determine if at least 70% of the states in the sample identified this skill or trait as something comparable as well. So through this very first step in the process with conducting this research effort, we identified 8 key skills and traits that will be utilized as we reflect upon our current Indiana academic standards. And one of the things that I'll point out as we reflect on these 8 skills and traits is that several of these are already integrated into aspects of the work that are currently underway. So when we think about the first one, specifically communication, this is already embedded in our employability skills. This is also built into Indiana GPS going forward. Collaboration is very much the same. We have some that are embedded in our Indiana academic standards already, initiative and self-advocacy, being able to gather important materials and research and read through those. Problem solving is currently an Indiana academic standard in mathematics. Perseverance is embedded both in employability skills and noted in our Indiana academic standards. Integrity is the same. Growth mindset is noted in employability skills as well. And then with our last one that's noted here, informational, digital, and financial literacy, it is embedded in several Indiana academic standards and is also noted as part of our work on the Indiana GPS. So as we reflect on these skills and traits, these will serve as a decision-making point as we streamline our standards going forward. But one important aspect to note specifically is that several of these are already part of the work that we're doing here in Indiana. So with the legislation, we are going to be reflecting on our academic standards, and just to level set the intent of the academic standards, The purpose is to ensure that it's clearly defined what students need to know and be able to do at each grade level and content area. They are never intended to be an exhaustive list of everything that may be covered in the content and instruction, but do try to ensure that there is similarity across all schools and corporations within the state about that minimum expectation of what students need to know and are able to do. And as a reminder, the standard, how it is taught, and the curriculum that may be associated with it is determined locally. So as we work through the streamlining process related to the academic standards, we're starting from the entirety of our current set of Indiana academic standards, and those 8 skills and traits will be used to help inform our teams that are coming together to identify potential areas that can be streamlined going forward. So that next bubble indicates that the next step in the process will be to streamline those standards. And one of the things that I think is really important to recognize is the intent is to maintain the rigor of our current Indiana academic standards. So that is definitely in the forefront of our minds working through this very thoughtful process, is that we want to maintain the rigor and really focus on those aspects that are most essential, even reflecting on the data that was just shared, to make sure that students are achieving those foundational skills and traits that are needed for long-term success. So over time, we will define the prioritized Indiana academic standards. And within that set, the legislation also requires that we identify 1/3 of those as truly essential. So this diagram reflects the step-by-step process that we will be undertaking to reflect on our current Indiana academic standards. So we are currently initiating this effort already at the department, and we have an internal review of all of the standards underway right now. And there is a very specific criteria and decision-making protocol that our team is undertaking to really be very thoughtful about each and every standard as we navigate this process. We will additionally be recruiting others to engage with us in this process, both educators and community members, to ensure that we maintain the integrity and the expectations for each grade level and content area that's represented. And alongside the standards work, we also are very clear that we need to maintain the integrity of our assessment system as well. And so all of this work is very collaborative across the teaching and learning team and assessment team to ensure that at the end of this process, when we have the streamlined Indiana academic standards, that those can best inform the assessment process as well. In terms of our timeline and next steps, again, this work is underway right now. We will be procuring a vendor to help assist us in this process, mainly from a logistical standpoint. As you can imagine, undertaking a review of all of the standards is a very complex process. And so we need some additional capacity to come alongside and support. That committee work that I referenced will be occurring in February to May of 2023. And then our goal is to be able to provide the streamlined Indiana academic standards to the board in June. We will continue to work additionally on our content connectors. Content connectors are specific standards for students with significant cognitive disabilities. So once we formalize the streamlined Indiana academic standards, then we will also undertake a similar process for the content connectors. and I'll open it up for any thoughts or questions.
Any thoughts or questions? Yes, Iris.
Yeah, when I look at these skills and traits, a lot of them to me scream CTE and what happens in a vibrant CTE programs. How are we looking at collaborating and ensuring there's collaboration between our standards and CTEs and how that works together?
That's a good question. Dr. Flores, you want to respond to that?
Sure. I think one of the things that we're trying to reflect most on is really the continuum of reinforcing these skills in the K-12 space. And so some of these aspects of the standards we need to be intentional about in very early grades as well. So collaboration and communication, one of the elements of that coincides to work that's already underway is actually in English language arts. And so reflecting on that very intentionally to determine if there's ways to emphasize that or potentially identify that as an essential skill, so that as students are progressing through the K-12 continuum and potentially looking at different pathways and opportunities, that they have those skills and traits that are necessary regardless of the path that they may choose.
So let me just add on, because Iris, that's a really interesting question. Through the legislation, we are looking at content areas, English, math, history, right? Our main content areas, but the legislation, are we looking at CTE standards? It's super complementary, right? But I just, Dr. Flores, is CTE a part of the standards review?
Not specifically, no.
We likely, well, for sure need to take that as an action item and connect with the CTE team to make sure they're aware of this and make sure it's completely complementary. I mean, that's a really, really good point.
Yeah, I think just working with students, if they could do their business writing in their English class, but it's for an entrepreneurship program, if they're starting a company or doing something,
Absolutely.
Why are they not getting credit for that and in their English class?
Absolutely.
So unsiloing the learning and getting it embedded into those programs.
And related to that, and this is kind of sideline, but I always want to bring us back to this because Katie, I was with you. You visited a session I did at the CTE conference,
Yeah.
right? And you talked about being big and bold and dreaming and whatever, right?
Yeah.
And I'm big and bold and all those things, figuratively and literally, right? But how do we all? So your point is so great, because I was thinking like, gosh, FFA does every one of those, right? Now,
Yes.
you all know I'm biased toward that organization. I don't apologize.
Entrepreneurship does every one of those.
I don't apologize for that, right?
I
So
might be
we can
biased.
have a fight over who's better. We are. But it does all those things, right? So how do we? And you've heard me say this before. How do we get credit for students for things that they're doing outside of school? I've brought this before. Even the student. So about 6 board meetings you could go back and watch. And I talked about the student I met who works at McDonald's, and his manager there makes him the manager when he works so that he can go do other things. Well, there's a kid that's doing the stuff that we're talking. I just encourage, and I know this is way off topic, sorry, but I just encourage us to think about that stuff as we think big and bold. And you said, let's think what it could look like if it doesn't look like what it does today. And I think that's something that looks like what it doesn't look like today, right?
So coming into the legislative session, one of the things that we're going to be asking for as a board is increased flexibility to really envision what our diplomas could and should be in the future, as well as how we might measure schools. And with that flexibility, I think we have the opportunity to think long and hard how some of this could look. And maybe we don't do it right out of the gate, maybe we do, but that, I think that's a prime time for some discussion there.
Yeah.
Also, along with the standard, are we focusing on K-3 language arts standards first because there shouldn't be a laundry list there so we can get those out, get them approved and get started? Or are we going to try to take them all at the same time and then not be able to implement until 24, 25?
Dr. Flores, do you want to respond to that?
So the legislation actually required us to start with high school, but we are undertaking everything at once because we feel like it's important to have a very concerted effort across the board in K-12. So our goal right now is to very aggressively look at streamlining the assessment, or I'm sorry, the standards in 22-23. Then we can launch for implementation in 23-24. And then the potential assessment would then align in 25-26.
I don't care about the assessment. We've started with high school. Why can't we finish the elementary now?
I think what
and get
Dr.
it
Flores
done?
just said is, it is November 2022.
Yeah.
This is the most aggressive timeline to get it to the board by June 2023. 6 months to review all of the standards. I think your point is important. In legislation, if it was started high school, but we know the importance of K1, 2, 3, like right now, based on the data we just saw. Our goal is to aggressively hit and be ready to go in June across the board. So not just start with high school, but just look at all of them and be ready to get that approved by the board in June. It is a uber aggressive timeline to do that, and we'll keep you posted how it's going. But I hear your point for sure.
It just seems as if we do these high school standards, and we got so many other things we need to get done. High schools make the pathways work. But I think that my hair's on fire about literacy K-3.
Right.
And that's,
Yeah, all of it. All of our
that's-
hair's on fire about literacy K-3, and it's one of those things. So statute requires us to start at high school. We know our hair's on fire K-3. We're pushing simultaneously to get that done.
the high school lifts a heavy lift,
Yes, sir.
probably
Yeah,
out of
it
everything.
is.
I mean, it just is.
Yeah.
I mean, as we move through the grades, we just keep adding, and I know we're supposed to be subtracting,
Yeah.
but, we also need to go back and look at, 2010, we had the best standards in the United States. And then we screwed them up, and we added more to them with Common Core. Can we go back and look at what we led in with those standards, and when we had success and when our scores were up because we were focused, and not forget the work that was done then as we move forward?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Dr. Flores, Dr. Flores has been around a number of years, and we have team members as well that could absolutely take a look at that. So thank you. Any other thoughts? Yeah, go ahead,
In
Byron.
keeping with the metaphor, my hair went away. But Dr. Flores, and you probably knew I would ask this question, but the essential 33% is what we're ultimately going to, what our teachers are going to focus on, whether that be for the assessments, whatever that system looks like, because I know there's some creative looks at what that could be. But that's the ultimate goal, is that we're looking at the essential 33% so that teachers really know which I've said all along is raising the bar, right? If I know it's those 33%, then we can raise the bar and have every student hit those. Am I right in that?
Yes, so those essential standards that are going to be identified, the intent of those is that they reflect the foundational skills, those skills that are most needed as we work through the vertical articulation into the subsequent grades, to really ensure that we're mastering those skills and traits, in addition to the other standards that will remain. But we will have a set that are defined specifically as essential.
Okay, so now you just said something that you said the other standards that are lit. So what will that look like when we're looking at whether our students are meeting the performance that we want? They're going to have to meet both sets of those?
In terms of the requirement for assessments, those have to be designed to assess the Indiana academic standards. So when we look at this fourth circle here at the end, the assessment will still have to be built upon all of the Indiana academic standards, but it may be that the blueprint is reflective and prioritizes those standards that are identified as essential. So those would be the prominent standards assessed by the test blueprint.
So, and sorry, and you know, every time I'm with you, I ask these questions just so will that prioritized list, is that being reduced as well? So are we truly reducing, or are we just making a list of essentials? Am I making sense with that question?
So I think so. So we start with all the standards we have in that full circle. The streamlining occurs where we'll have 75% of our standards. So a streamlining of standards, then of this 3/4, right, 75% circle becomes this whole. So this is now the 75%. Of that 75%, a third of those will be deemed essential, critical, foundational standards.
Okay, but as a teacher, I really still need to be worried about the 75%.
As a teacher, and those of us who in the room and listening who, and you were probably in the classroom too when essential standards were
Yep.
identified in the past, you still had your list of standards. Now, it's a streamlined list of standards, a rigorous streamlined list of standards, a third of which would be deemed essential. To Dr. Flores' point, I think when it comes to, and this is down the road, as we've already talked about, but when it comes to how this might be assessed, I mean, it could be that there's an additional weight on those essential because they matter most to a child's learning.
Okay.
Was that any follow-up question there, Byron?
Let's not make the assessment dictate our standards, is what I think he's trying to say. If we think this is what's most important at fourth grade language arts, we want our teachers to really focus in and hit that. If we have additional standards, and if your kids master things you can get to, and it's fourth grade appropriate, then go ahead and go there. But if we're gonna change skills in the state and raise our scores, we have to look at the essential ones, and that's what we have to get really, really good at.
Were you hitting
I
on
think
the
that's where I
assessment
am.
piece?
Where I am is I don't like to. I don't think we help our teachers. Having been there, I don't think we help our teachers to have two buckets still. That I'm still kind of held to making sure. And I get that, but I haven't liked that from the very beginning as we've talked about that. I think there ought to just be one set of. This is truly what I gotta have. If I have third graders, when my third graders leave me, this is what they gotta know to be ready for fourth grade.
See,
And I think right now we spend a lot of time with, this is what they need to know. This would be really cool if they need to know, or if they can have and then we just don't ever, I just think it's kind of a reverse thinking. And it's a subtraction thing, right? We get better by subtracting, and subtracting's hard to do, and our minds don't let us do that. I say that all the time. But how do we subtract to get to where we can truly raise the bar so that we really have them knowing, here's what we gotta know, right? What is that we gotta know? That's, I guess my thing is I still don't, I think that's hard for teachers. I think we could do our teachers a big service if we say, here's what they gotta know.
That's good. That's great feedback. Thank you.
Yeah, I would agree. And when I was in the classroom, what I did was those essential standards. So I love the fact that I don't know why any standard exists, it's not essential. And I'm not speaking for you, but I feel like that's where you were headed. So that reduction and I know that we're working towards getting that done, is the most important thing that we will do over the next 2 years, because we have to do less better in order to get our kids caught back up.
I think the other thing too that I always think about it, to me, the standards are the bare minimum. That's the bare minimum expectation of what's happening in a classroom. And we don't have a culture that looks at it that way, I don't think. I think we look at standard as, well, we have to do that. And it's like, for me, if I'm not doing that and then a bunch more with my students, I don't think I'm doing my job. And so how do we change the culture in education in our state where the standards are not the thing we all glorify and put on a shelf? It's the bare minimum. It's the baseline expectation, not the all-in expectation.
Yeah, good feedback.
Now, see, if that's the case, then I think then our standards need to change to where the standards should be the be all. We don't get the other things or other learning that takes place, but we have to lay out what do we want a third grader to be able to do, and if they can do that, that's all that we care about. If you can do sixth grade work in third grade, good for you. But to be honest, I don't care.
Right, but again,
I want to know that you can do this,
the bare,
and what are those
the minimum of
essential
what you
things
have
want
to
you
have.
to be able to do in each grade level, and that's those. I don't think there should be any standards outside of essential standards. Is where I would fall with it. And I know that's probably a 70% reduction, which is much more than 25. But I stand.
Well, it's 33%, right? Or could be 33%.
33% of 75%.
If we say those are essential, then that's it, right?
So I think you've made some really good points around the table. And we have committees that will be meeting to make these the most rigorous, best standards possible in the future. And if anyone would like to be a part of that process, we would eagerly welcome you.
We probably all ought to in some way.
Byron's signing everyone up
Well,
right now.
I mean, seriously, right? If we think this is, because I agree with Beach, I've said this all along, right? This is, to me, this is the game changer. Not that the science, all that other stuff is too, they're all game changers. But this, to me, is because this is what we've been hearing from if we really listen to teachers, and having been in those shoes, this is what everybody talks about. I got so much to do that I can't ever get it all accomplished. So please, let's figure out what's a third grader got to know the fourth grader. What's a fourth grader, and that's even too in the box thinking, because I would just as soon as that person that needs to move to those other standards could move to those standards, right? Why aren't we competency based instead of grade based? But that's a whole nother discussion that we could get into.
Honestly, that's what I was
That's where
actually
you were
writing
going,
down.
right?
Is like, why are we not
See, now we're
standards-based
back
grading?
on track. My organization's better than yours, but we you know.
We do have a couple people with their hand raised. Katie Moat, and then Scott Bass will go to you.
Thank you, Dr. Jenner. I just wanted to kind of go back and frame out, and I totally hear and appreciate the nudge to, we're going to have committees to dig into this. But I think at the level set altitude, the policy that we create in this legislation has to signal the right table stakes, and it has to create an environment that incentivizes the behavior that we want. And that is my wonder, and going back to Iris's really great question a few minutes ago, or push, we need to, I think we have an opportunity to knit together the elective space and the core space. There is such valuable learning, particularly the relevance that students find in the elective space, that makes the core work come to life and be more meaningful. If there is separation between those two definitions of success, we will disincentivize co-teaching. We will disincentivize integration between elective and core spaces. And my strong hunch is that the more we can interconnect those courses and pedagogies and experiences that bring relevance to this content, we will see the performance on standardized testing like NAEP and others go in the direction we seek, which is back to that wonder about, okay, so what are the ingredients to the assessment outcomes and the proficiency that we work for kids to have. So I just wanted to flag that because I think it would be a big failure if we put together this legislation and standard revision and it continues to reinforce gaps in between the elective courses and core courses. I think that was a great push. And I really strongly believe that that's going to help us move the needle in the ways that we want. And again, I just think as we're going back and we're reflecting on this, that's the role, I think, of our two organizations working together, the DOE and the state board. And then I think there's this question around the coaching and the support to deliver those experiences in ways that have outsized strategic value, like the science of reading work and other initiatives that help schools, districts, and teachers create the experiences in the classroom for kids that will lead to these outcomes that we seek. And that feels like a really separate path and piece. And so I know all of that will be knitting together, but I think if we signal the wrong thing with this endeavor, there will be so much to clean up, and it's an opportunity now. So I just wanted to knit together what I was hearing in some of those comments and really appreciate the chance to be heard on that. And Todd has been so patient that I'd love to pass the mic to him.
Thank you, Katie. And Scott, jump in.
Yeah, so first of all, Katie, great comments. I really agree with that. Because one of the things that as you look at the process, and I guess my encouragement here is when you have committees who are looking at the standards, I mean, you'll have, I'm sure, really, really robust discussion on which ones are the 25% that come out. Then you'll have a more robust discussion about the essential. And I think my encouragement, going back to some of the comments that other board members have made, is to keep in front of all those committees those 2, 3, 4 most important things at first grade, at second grade, at third grade, right? So that, because it's easy to get caught in the detail and they'll come up with a list of standards, but then you got to step back and go, are those the right ones, right? I think if we know, for example, that here are the 3 most important things. A student coming out of third grade, here are the 3 most important things. And the field can tell us if a student has mastered these 3 things in third grade, they're going to be fine in fourth grade, right? And the same thing as you go up the list. And then at the high school level, to Katie's comments, they're going to dive into every single high school course has a comprehensive list of standards. And I think if you keep those siloed, you're going to reduce them, but then you're still going to have all these separate silos of stuff and with a lot of repetition and I would really encourage, say, look, going back to the 8 essential skills, then going, what's the most important things for our high school graduates to know? And what are those, again, 5, 6 things that if they got this down, they're good, whether they go to work or whether they go to college. And then doing the committee work and matching it against those to make sure that process check, right, that we're good at the end, that we really we've done what we wanted to do, because that really was the whole intent of all this legislation, was like, hey, we've got too much stuff. Our test scores show we have too much stuff. So let's get to the most important things, but let's make sure as we go through the process that all these separate committees that are working on all these different standards and at the high school of all these different courses, that we don't just whittle some down and then our assessments, 4 years from now, we're like, gosh, our assessments still show only 40% of our students are mastering this because we didn't keep the right things in. So that's my encouragement, is just to really look at those most important pieces and keep that in front of every single committee so that they've got that in mind while they're starting to work through the detail.
As you were talking, just another piece of information for the board in terms of feedback that we are getting on the process. And by the way, the message heard loud and clear here. What are the most important things that must be known at each grade level focus, focus, focus. So I wanted just to make you all aware of some of the other feedback we're hearing, especially from some parents and families, is they see this reduction here, of which we're really focused on the streamlining, but they see that and there's concern that we would be reducing the rigor in Indiana with the reduction. And so I just want to emphasize publicly that what are the most important things that they must know, and really, really, as a board, having spoken with all of you, the emphasis on rigor is top of mind for all of us. We will stay focused on rigor in this process, even as we seek to streamline and focus in our standards. So wanted just for you all to have that as a heads up. Yeah.
Well, I think we also need to recognize that, you know, if a standard is to introduce multiplication to a first grader just to see whether or not they can do it, and we reduce that, it's not that they're not going to learn that at some other time in the span of K-12.
Yeah.
It's just that we want to make certain that when they're in third grade, they master that.
Yeah.
And so it may go away grade 1, but it doesn't mean it's going away.
Yeah.
And then the rigor piece can stay as we really focus in on what we want to know at those grades.
That's a good practical example, I think, to help parents and families understand the process. So thank you for sharing that.
Well, and I think that relates to our own jobs too. Like as I think about the work that, as we're having the conversation, the work that I do right now, like my boss, Dr. Smith, said, okay, we have 10 projects we're working on. You're going to be average at all of these at best. If you try to do all 10, let's work on 3 and get those great, then we'll move to the next 3, which in our minds is a grade level sequence, as opposed to trying to boil the ocean. Let's be great at these 3 instead of just okay at 10. And I feel like that's the direction we're headed. And being great at those 3, to your point, the rigor is more intense than what it would be if it was widespread.
Yeah, because you can go more deep. You can go deeper into the content.
So define, because we've thrown rigor around. And I always think we need to do this. Define rigor as you see it for this project. What's that mean? Because that's an important thing for our parents to understand when we say that we're still going to maintain rigor, right? What's that mean?
Yeah, I think that's an important question that with the individuals providing that feedback, that we need to ask them specifically. Just peeling back at what does rigor mean to you as a parent, family? Huge part of this equation will be on our committees. So I think that's a question that that I need to circle back with them when they've used that.
Because we don't have a definition.
Well, I would tell you, it's not only just learn it, but apply it.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's where we've missed the boat on a lot of this, is we've covered it. There's no application and no real world connection for our kids.
That actually goes to what I've been writing down, just like, I know that we don't say how things have to happen, but do we look at pedagogy and what type of pedagogy style offers more rigor? And then give research on that, to schools with kind of a tell, show, do model, where the tell and the show is like 10% and the doing of the thing is, 80 to 90%. So students get shots on rep applying it, over and over again. Because I just think back in 2008, I started a school in Wisconsin, and we went through a shift to standards-based grading as well. And so these conversations were the same conversations we were having there. And when a kid can do it and they can use it and they can apply it, they own it. But if they're not given that chance because of the pedagogy style or the style of teaching, that they're not going to have as good a shot as the kid next door that might have a teacher that does have applied learning as the main form of practice.
A lot of great conversation, feedback into the process ahead. It's major. It's very, very important, as has been discussed. Any other comments, feedback? I don't see any hands up on the screen. Yeah,
I
go
would
ahead,
just
DJ.
say I do appreciate, as we poke and push here, please don't take this as not appreciating what an absolute monster this work is.
And needed.
And yeah, I mean, this is a giant. And
You all
we
know
all
I-
appreciate that.
Thank you. I poke and push
Yeah,
everyone, and so
yeah,
I
don't
appreciate
take
that. I think that makes us
the
better.
poking and the
when
pushing.
when we do that, I
And
think
to
we
me,
have
that's,
to.
yeah, like that. So please, I don't want
Yeah.
that to be
Thank you,
perceived
BJ.
as being difficult or being unhappy with where we are. That
Yeah.
is not the case. We understand that this is an absolute whale,
Yeah.
and we understand that. We appreciate that.
Yeah.
And I think our question is how can we best help?
Yeah.
How can we best serve to make things better for kiddos? And that's all that we want to do.
And the questions and comments today, to me, just set us up for greater success. There are multiple different points that I've noted. So greatly appreciate the conversation and feedback from the board members present and on the call. On that note, do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Motion second, all in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you.